Would you ever imagine having to fight a war with the law just to protect the land your grandfather left you? My name's Cole Harrington, veteran, 3 tours in the Middle East. I've never backed down from a fight, not until the enemy showed up in a Lexus, wearing a tie and talked like they owned the whole damn state. It all started with a map, a pipeline drawn straight through my pasture, without asking. They thought I'd roll over. They were wrong, dead wrong. This is the story of how I turned my ranch into a battlefield, using everything from birdhouse spy cams to homemade skunk bombs and, yes, legal flashbangs, to teach one corrupt HOA and a greedy oil company that just because we live out here doesn't mean we're clueless. And just because you've got money doesn't mean you get to walk all over our land. My name is Cole Harrington, and if there's one thing the entire Pinewood HOA board will never forget, it's the day they stepped foot on my land without knowing I'd buried flashbangs along their path. I'm not the kind of man who likes to dredge up the past, but some wars deserve to be remembered. That morning began peacefully like any other on my 120-acre property out in Wesson County, Texas. Blue skies, a light breeze, and my 2 cattle dogs, Duke and Bullet, doing their usual rounds. After 20 years of military service, mostly guarding oil pipelines in the Middle East, I thought I'd finally found peace. This ranch wasn't just real estate. It was a legacy. My grandfather's, my father's, and now mine. Back when he was alive, Grandpa used to say, "Land doesn't just feed cattle, Cole, it feeds the soul." I've carried those words with me my whole life. But peace doesn't last long. Around 10 a.m., there were 3 knocks on the door. Precise, cold, smug. Bullet barked his throat raw. I opened the door. Standing there was a tall woman with lightly curled platinum blonde hair, dressed in a navy pantsuit tailored to perfection, expensive heels dusted with a bit of country dirt. She looked like she'd just walked out of a law firm in Dallas. "Mr. Harrington," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Clarissa Vane, president of the Pinewood Lakes HOA. I shook her hand. Cold. Like gripping a serpent's claw. "I'm here to discuss a community improvement project that requires just a small portion of your land." I raised an eyebrow. "Come in," I said, though my gut was already flashing red. At my kitchen table, Clarissa rolled out maps, blueprints, sample contracts, all full color, professionally bound. "We're working with the energy company Blue Horizon to build an oil pipeline through this region," she said, voice smooth as a commercial jingle. "It would only need about 15 acres from the eastern part of your property. You'll be compensated fairly, and the entire county will benefit economically." I looked at the map. The pipeline, she claimed, would only take a small part, was cutting straight through the best grazing land I had. I looked up, my voice now stripped of pleasantries. "No, my land's not for sale. I'm not in your HOA, and I don't intend to be dragged into it." Clarissa froze, just for a moment. Then the smile returned, but her eyes turned ice cold. "Actually, Pinewood has recently expanded its jurisdiction, and this project is classified as community infrastructure, which gives us certain legal options. A threat, paper thin, but with a blade behind it." I stood, pointed to the door. "I know my rights and I know the law. Goodbye." On her way to her car, Clarissa turned back one last time. "Whether you cooperate or not, the pipeline will come through. Friendly advice, don't fight the inevitable." I stood on my porch, watching her overpriced Lexus SUV kick up dust down the entry road. I wasn't angry. I was calculating. What Clarissa didn't know was I hadn't just guarded pipelines like this before. I'd done it in war zones, in places where stepping an inch too far meant leaving a leg behind. She picked the wrong man to mess with. Clarissa Vane wasn't the kind to take no for an answer. And I sure as hell wasn't the first man she'd tried to drag into her HOA hurricane disguised as community betterment. I knew her type. People who don't come to ask permission. They come to dictate terms. And if you don't comply, they'll create enough pressure to make you feel like you never had a choice. That afternoon, after she left, I brewed a pot of coffee, sat down, and opened my laptop. I don't do social media, but I still know how to use Google and what I found chilled me more than any flashbang ever could. Pinewood Lakes HOA wasn't just a suburban tennis club whining about fence heights. They were in bed with one of the shadiest energy companies in the South, Blue Horizon Energy. I combed through contract bids, local news archives, and pages of resident complaints from neighboring counties. Their model was clear. Identify the most convenient pipeline route. Bribe local officials to approve community expansion. Use the HOA as a legal front to force resident compliance. Anyone who resisted? Legal claims, fake environmental complaints, or mysterious accidents. 3 days later, just like clockwork, a court summons was slapped onto my door by a county deputy. I was being sued by the HOA for potential contamination of a protected water source. According to the complaint, burning dry manure at the Harrington Ranch poses a risk of chemical seepage into the groundwater system that services Pinewood residents. I nearly blew a gasket. I hadn't burned a damn thing. But that didn't matter. All they needed was enough ink and seals to make coercion look official. I stood in the county courthouse parking lot, court notice in hand, my old field jacket catching the wind. That's when she appeared. "Are you Cole Harrington?" The rancher. "Being sued by the HOA for environmental violations?" I turned around. A woman about my age, sharp eyes, document case in hand, hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Her outfit was simple, but her presence said she was no stranger to standing her ground. "I'm Madison Kessler, environmental attorney. I think you need to hear a few things about Pinewood and Blue Horizon." We talked at a small diner on the edge of town, where the coffee was so thick it was practically syrup. Madison opened her case and pulled out a stack of documents thicker than I'd ever expect an outsider to collect. "Blue Horizon is anything but clean," she said. "They've had 3 pipeline leaks, covered up damages, and paid hush money to bury the stories. And Pinewood HOA? They're the legal shield that keeps lawsuits from touching the company." Then she unfolded a map. The pipeline cut straight from Blue Horizon's drilling fields to a refinery hub near the interstate, and my land sat right in the middle like a spine. "They don't want to reroute. A detour would cost them over $3 million and delay the project by 6 months, she said. "You're the final obstacle." I looked at her, skeptical. "Why are you helping me? I didn't hire you." "I used to work for a company like Blue Horizon," Madison replied. "I watched them kill a town, slowly, with a leaking pipe. My mother died from water contamination in a similar case. I couldn't save her. But if I help you, maybe I can save myself." I nodded. No more questions. A man who's seen combat knows when someone isn't lying. "I'm not backing down. I'm not selling. I'm not surrendering," I said. "But I don't plan on dying in court, either." Madison gave a faint smile. For the first time since we met, her eyes carried a flicker of hope. "Then I suggest we start by going for their guts." Madison didn't wait for me to make a decision. By the next morning, she'd already emailed me a preliminary action plan, step by step, target by target, just like the op orders I used to write back in the Middle East. The difference was, instead of weapons and heat maps, we had land registry files, forged environmental reports, and a list of bought-out officials. We started with Diana Harlow, or rather Clarissa Vane, her new name since legally changing her identity 8 years ago. Turns out Clarissa had been involved in 2 civil lawsuits related to land development projects in Arkansas and Georgia. In both, the HOAs she led were accused of coercing residents to sell land for public park construction, only to flip it to private investors. I printed it all out, stacking the files on my dining table like ammunition. This was my battlefield. Now, law, media, and the rough justice of Texas. Madison pointed out a critical detail in the paperwork Clarissa had brought on that first visit, the technical survey warrant. She said, "They only have the right to survey your property if it falls within HOA jurisdiction, and according to the maps I pulled, it clearly doesn't." I asked, "Then why did the court allow them on my land?" Madison's mouth curled into a cold smirk, the kind I'd seen on intel officers near the Syrian border. "Because the judge who signed the order is Roger Blackwell, former strategic advisor for, take a wild guess, Blue Horizon Energy. In the military, we call this kind of setup fire team corruption. Every link in the chain is rigged, and unless you blow it wide open, they'll cover for each other like soldiers in a foxhole. Oui, boissy. Don't have to fight them all, I said. Just need to detonate the right target. Madison nodded. And I know where to start. That night, we drove to Pecan Hill, a town 30 minutes away, where the Pinewood HOA Community Center was located. According to Madison's intel, the night cleaning crew often left the rear door unlocked for about 10 minutes every Tuesday. We arrived on schedule. I kept watch while Madison slipped into Clarissa's office. Less than 15 minutes later, she emerged with a phone full of photos of internal contracts. Pinewood HOA would receive a community development fee of $1.2 million if the pipeline succeeded. Clarissa herself would get a private consultation fee of $200,000, all contingent on one clause: must acquire Harrington property. That was when it clicked. They weren't just land grabbers, they were a criminal organization dressed up as an HOA, but to beat them, I had to play their game and bait them into making a mistake. I started installing hidden cameras, motion sensors, and directional microphones along the eastern fence line, the route they had marked for the pipeline. At the same time, I deliberately left suspicious items lying around: bins of cow manure, empty ammonium nitrate containers, and a few rusted cans labeled waste test. They'd think I was just some eccentric, unhinged veteran. And now, maybe even dangerous. Good. I wanted them to feel fear. The next afternoon, I got a visit from the HOA's technical survey team. 2 trucks, 4 men in suits and reflective vests, and a driver I recognized instantly. Gregory Knox, chief engineer for Blue Horizon, and someone I'd encountered back in Iraq in 2006. I remembered because I used to guard their pipeline convoys. Irony's a cruel mistress. Gregory looked at me through his sunglasses. Ice cold. We have a court order. You don't cooperate, we're coming in. I raised my hand, grinning. Be my guest, but make sure you read the warning signs along the fence. I won't be responsible if something gets triggered. He paused, then smirked. That day, they didn't step foot past the fence, but I knew night would fall and they would return. And when they did, they wouldn't just find a fence. They'd find the hell I buried beneath it. I used to serve in places where the enemy wore no uniform. Out there, war wasn't declared. It seeped in through whispers, crept in by night, and flickered just before the blast. I never imagined that same dirty war would follow me all the way to my horse stable. That night, Duke and Bullet howled like banshees at midnight. I shot up, still in my pajama bottoms, grabbed my flashlight, and ran out into the yard. The stench hit me before the sight did. The hay barn behind the stables was on fire. I grabbed the hose and fought the blaze for 15 minutes. Thankfully, it hadn't reached the main stable where the horses were sleeping, but by the fence line, among the ashes, I found something small, a half-burned note with one corner still legible. Sell the land, or next, it'll be the horses. My grip tightened until the paper crumbled into dust. I didn't sleep that night. I went inside and opened the steel box where I kept my souvenirs from the military: tuned motion sensors, civilian-grade flashbangs, non-lethal, but enough to send a squad scrambling long-range directional mics, and one small, terrifyingly simple device, a portable field speaker, a voice from the darkness where no face could be seen. They wanted war? I'd give them a crash course in field ops. Next morning, I called Madison. They torched the hay barn. Left a message. Her tone shifted instantly. Ethan, sorry, Cole. This is beyond civil dispute. This is criminal. I'm calling the FBI. I gave a cold chuckle. Call whoever you want. But while they shuffle paper, I'm securing my fence. The next 3 days, I turned my ranch into a tactical playground. I didn't set anything that could kill. But I wanted them to remember every wrong step on my land as a personal embarrassment in front of their crew and co-conspirators. I buried flashbangs triggered by soil-level motion sensors, right where the HOA marked their pipeline route. Scent. Canisters, cow manure laced with skunk oil, a gift from Logan, the the feed store owner who hated the HOA after they fined him for aesthetically displeasing chicken coops. A speaker system projecting military-grade voice warnings. Alert, you are trespassing in a secured area, and a few camouflaged mannequins with motorized head turns, just enough to make someone believe they were being watched. I also hung warning signs the size of a hubcap along the fence line. Private land, tactical security system, active. You were warned. By Wednesday afternoon, Clarissa came back. But this time, there was no pantsuit, no plastic smile. She brought a construction crew and a temporary court order authorizing technical survey with enforcement assistance if necessary. I met them at the gate, phone in hand, filming. You're stepping onto my land with machinery. If anything happens, you're fully responsible. Clarissa waved me off. You've been warned. You chose this path. I backed away, stayed clear, and watched. The excavators started digging. 2 workers stepped into the prepared zone. I activated the surveillance feed from my phone. Sensor tripped. Flashbang detonated in a burst of light. A booming voice thundered from the bushes. Intrusion detected. The whole crew screamed. 2 men fell flat into the mud. One of the pipeline techs slipped straight into the scent canister. And what happened next was hard to describe. He vomited on the spot, tore his shirt off, and yelled, "It's burning! It's burning!" Clarissa shrieked, clutching her head and bolting for her SUV. Gregory, the lead engineer, stood frozen, mouth wide open. The scene before him wasn't in any textbook he'd ever studied. 15 minutes later, county, police showed up. I greeted them with a coffee in hand, showed them the camera footage, and pointed at the warning signs. These are civilian-grade devices, non-lethal, buried on my land. They broke my fence, initiated unauthorized work, and triggered it themselves. And here's the paperwork I filed yesterday, official trespass notice. One officer glanced at Gregory. You've got a court order for surveying, but not to breach fences. This'll require further review. Clarissa and her crew retreated, stinking, shaken, and humiliated. I didn't need to say a word. My cameras had said enough. I've been slandered by terrorists holding AK-47s and posting propaganda videos online. At least they had the decency to identify themselves as the enemy. Clarissa Vane? She played a different game. Her next strike didn't explode like a flashbang. It bled like a dull knife. The morning after the biohazard spectacle, I was sipping coffee when I got a call from someone I knew in the next town over. Cole, you might want to stop by the bookstore. This morning's paper gave you the front page. I drove into town, grabbed a copy, and the headline was screaming in bold type big enough to read from the parking lot. Unstable veteran in Wesson poses danger to community, Cho calls him a potential threat. I skimmed the article. Anonymous sources from the HOA claimed I had unregistered weapons. They alleged erratic behavior during my service, no citations naturally, and said multiple neighbors felt threatened by loud explosions and chemical smells on Harrington property. The article concluded with a gem. Mr. Harrington has refused to cooperate with a project designed to benefit the public, instead deploying quasi-military tactics in response. I folded the paper and stuffed it in my pocket. I've faced Taliban fighters with machine guns and IEDs, but I'd never encountered something so slick and venomous as the way this HOA used the media to cast themselves as heroes and paint a farmer defending his land as the lunatic villain. That night, I spotted a strange car parked by the roadside, just outside my ranch gate. I raised my binoculars. Inside sat Trevor Barnes, Gregory Knox's so-called security consultant, and another man I didn't recognize. They were using flashlights, taking notes, occasionally snapping photos. Toward the stables, I didn't move. I let them play their little surveillance games, knowing my cameras were recording every second. But I texted Madison. They've moved from tearing fences to tearing reputations, and I've got a feeling the next play's going to be dirtier. I was right. 3 nights later, at 2:12 a.m., Bullet let out a bone-chilling howl. I shot out of bed and checked the cameras. My heart sank to my boots. The horse stable was on fire. It wasn't electrical, it wasn't accidental. I saw it clearly. Trevor Barnes, dumping gasoline around the structure, then striking the match. I remotely triggered a nearby flashbang. The blast sent him sprawling, dropping the gas can, and bolting into the dark like a coward. I doused the flames within 10 minutes. No major damage, thank God. But exactly 27 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up. The reason? A formal complaint alleging storage of hazardous materials in the stable. I opened the barn and let them search. What did they find? A few bins of organic fertilizer, some wire, and skunk odor, all perfectly legal. I'd already moved all my old military gear into a locked bunker beneath the workshop. The next day, though, another headline: Police search veteran Cole Harrington's ranch. Community growing concerned. At this point, they weren't just hitting my property. They were trying to destroy my character. At the feed store, the owner gave me sideways glances. At the diner, conversations halted when I walked in, and then came the midnight calls. Sell the land, you lunatic. You're gonna lose everything. We know you've got guns. Madison started getting followed. She called me, voice tight with anger. Some creep followed me to the parking lot. I asked him what he wanted. He said, stay away from Harrington if you like breathing. I told her, send me the license plate. I've got someone who knows what to do. And then, something unexpected happened. The FBI stepped in. A special agent named Victor Rivera approached Madison after a court hearing. We've been investigating Blue Horizon for months. Bribery, leak cover-ups, land coercion. Mr. Harrington's case might be the missing piece. I wasn't just a veteran guarding oil lines overseas anymore. I was a branded community threat on the very soil my family had worked for generations. But with the feds involved now, the battlefield was shifting. Not the flashbangs, not the skunk bombs. The truth, that was the biggest bomb I ever dropped on an enemy. And once the FBI got involved, I knew it was time to change the rules of the game. Madison met me at our usual small-town cafe, but this time, she wasn't alone. Sitting beside her was Special Agent Victor Rivera from the FBI's Environmental Crimes Division. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a weathered man with the kind of eyes that had stared into more buried scandals than any audit ever uncovered. We need hard evidence of Blue Horizon and the HOA's intent to trespass and retaliate, Rivera said. We've been monitoring them for over a year. They're slick. The paperwork is always clean. What we need is something they don't see coming. I sipped my coffee and nodded. You need a trap, Rivera smiled. Don't love that word. But, yeah. At the same time, Madison received a message from Emily Nelson, Gregory Knox's daughter. An environmental activist, Emily had long distanced herself from her father over fundamental values. But after seeing him on camera igniting my stable, she chose our side. I used to think he was just a misguided engineer. But last night, I realized he's a perfect pawn for something evil. I'll help. She agreed to wear a wire in a private meeting with her father and to bait a confession. As for me, I prepared my own battlefield, the media. They wanted to smear me? Fine. Now it was my turn to tell the real story. Olivia Reynolds, the investigative journalist who'd once been manipulated into writing hit pieces on me, called back. I want to make it right. I believe you now. I've seen what Madison showed me, and I know I was used to it. I didn't need an apology. I just told her, you want to print the truth? I've got footage that'll wake up the whole state. I gave her footage of Gregory lighting the stable. Clarissa accepted her. Consulting fee. Night vision clips of HOA employees cutting my fence. And the kicker, a secret HOA emergency meeting where Clarissa screamed, I want that man erased from the map. If we can't buy his land, then make him lose it. 3 days later, the expose hit like artillery fire. The truth about Pinewood Hoe, oil bribes, and citizen suppression. Front page, me standing at my gate under the sign, Private Land, Do Not Enter. Right below, a photo of Clarissa mid-scream, skunk-stained and flashbang lit. That night, the whole state knew my name. Clarissa cracked. through the mic planted. In Gregory's car, I heard them arguing. He flipped it all. If Emily talks, I'm finished. Just greenlight Phase Z. I don't care what it costs. He has to disappear. That was all the FBI needed. Rivera called me. We're staging a controlled sting operation. You'll play the part of a beaten man. Call Clarissa. Invite her to negotiate. I chuckled. Defeat a familiar role, but this time, I'm acting to win. We arranged a negotiation dinner at a local steakhouse with a private room. The FBI wired the place. Olivia waited outside. Emily was ready with a recorder. Clarissa and Gregory showed up. Confidence, ice cold. They handed over a check for $200,000 and a deed draft. Then Gregory slipped. Flashbangs don't scare anyone, Harrington. You don't get it. We don't play by the law. Clarissa leaned in. We've made people like you lose everything more times than I can count. A little press won't stop progress. That was the cue. The FBI stormed in. Gregory panicked. Trevor Barnes, who had snuck in, as backup, drew a weapon. I didn't flinch. Rivera and his team were already in motion. Game over. Not every explosion deafens. Some just shake the whole system until it collapses. And right there in that little steakhouse in Wesson, when the FBI burst into the meeting room and slapped cuffs on Clarissa Vane, Gregory Knox, and Trevor Barnes, I heard the boom. Inside, an entire empire built on a fake HOA throne. Trevor was the first to break. When the FBI swarmed the room, he pulled a gun, but only pointed it at the floor, hands trembling like autumn leaves. As a soldier, I could see it immediately. He'd never fired at anything but a paper target. Rivera barked, "Weapon down! On the ground, now!" Within 3 seconds, Trevor was face down, cuffed and silent. The strong stay quiet. The weak reach for violence when cornered. Clarissa, at first, tried to hold her poise. This is a misunderstanding. I have the right to remain silent, right? Rivera simply nodded. And you'd be wise to exercise it now. Gregory? The same engineer who once told me I couldn't resist the flow of progress? Now sat motionless, face pale as chalk, sweat soaking. Through his collar, outside the restaurant, a crowd had gathered. Folks who'd caught wind of my final meeting with the HOA. Among them, the ones who stayed silent when I was dragged through the press. The ones too scared to plant a tree the wrong shade of green. And people like Mike Hensley, who had been forced to sell his land cheap and fined for keeping his grandfather's old cattle barn. They clapped as the FBI walked the accused to their cars. Not out of joy, but because, for the first time, they saw power held accountable in daylight. But the quake wasn't done. Olivia Reynolds, the same journalist who once smeared my name, now stood at the front of the crowd, live streaming the FBI's official statement. She read clearly. The FBI confirms the arrest of 3 individuals in connection with a conspiracy involving bribery, property sabotage, abuse of civil authority, and environmental terrorism. Every word a nail sealing the coffin Clarissa had built with influence and intimidation. The crescendo came when Emily Nelson, Gregory's daughter, stepped forward, clutching copies of internal documents. My father once taught me about professional ethics, but he abandoned those when he covered up oil leaks, signed dirty contracts with the HOA, and helped orchestrate arson to force citizens off their land. I can't stay silent anymore. Her voice trembled, but her eyes cut like steel. I stand with the people, and with the truth. That very afternoon, the story spread across all of Texas. News stations showed drone footage of my ranch from above, the private property signs, the fake birdhouse cameras, and the iconic footage. Gregory fell backward into manure just as the flashbang detonated. Fox News ran the caption, "Veteran defends his land, HOA exec lands in the muck." At the same time, Mayor Thornton came under investigation. Judge Blackwell was suspended from the bench due to financial ties with Blue Horizon. The city council held an emergency session to withdraw the pipeline project entirely. And on Twitter, HOA Gate trended for 4 straight days. That night, I sat on my porch beside Madison, sipping my first glass of bourbon in 3 months of hell. "You know," she said, "they tried to make you look like some extremist. But now, you're the face of a whole movement, against dirty HOAs, against corporate bullies." I cracked a dry grin. I just wanted to protect my land, didn't expect to teach a whole damn state how to do the right thing. 6 months after the final flashbang echoed across my ranch, Wesson didn't look the same. Not because of me, but because people finally stood up together. Clarissa Vane was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for conspiring to seize private land, misappropriating HOA funds, and orchestrating arson to intimidate citizens. Gregory Knox received a lighter sentence, thanks to a guilty plea, and thanks to his own daughter exposing him in court. Trevor Barnes, I heard he's working at a horse therapy ranch in Montana now. No more tactical security. My ranch, once labeled a hazardous material zone, is now where local school groups come every week for tours. We call it Harrington Heritage Land School. Madison and I set aside part of the land to teach kids about land rights, regenerative farming, and how to protect property from abusive HOAs. Emily Nelson isn't Gregory Knox's daughter anymore. She's now environmental policy advisor to the state governor. Her speech before the state legislature on land rights and public integrity went viral across the country. And Madison? We're no longer just teammates. We're partners. For life. I proposed with a ring made from a piece of rusted steel pipe, salvaged from the failed pipeline the HOA once dreamed of forcing through my land. She laughed. Only you could turn scrap metal into a promise stronger than steel. The FBI invited me to speak at a private land security symposium, where I gave a talk on non-lethal legal defense tools. One state trooper leaned in during a coffee break and whispered, "We still play that video of Gregory falling into manure at team building retreats. I'm not rich. I didn't go into politics. I just live on the land my grandfather left me, growing hay for the horses and passing on what I've learned to others still under HOA threats. Whenever someone calls, usually a rancher from another county, asking how to fight back against land-grabbing HOAs, I simply say, you don't need flashbangs. You need courage, clean paperwork, and a camera in the right spot. Tonight, I will sit on my porch, bullets by my feet. Madison's making tea. The sun stains the hills with a burning orange glow. I look at the sign hanging by my front gate. Private. Land secured by truth, not force. They came here with maps, phony legal orders, and smiles sweet as snake venom. They left in handcuffs. I'm no hero. Just a man who stood on his land and didn't back down. But if my story made you install one more camera in your yard, double-check the deed your folks left you, or just believe that standing up is worth it, then every flashbang, every courtroom hour, every midnight threat I faced was worth it. Because as my grandfather once told me, you don't have to conquer the world, just hold the ground beneath your feet.